The Great Depression was a worldwide economic catastrophe which started in 1929 and lasted until the late 30s. It was the longest and most severe depression ever experienced by the developed Western world. Although it began in the United States, the Great Depression caused extreme declines in output, severe unemployment, and deflation in almost every country. Its social and cultural effects were evident, especially in the United States, where the Great Depression represented the struggle and difficulty faced by the Americans and Europeans. Before the war, the United States economy and industries were booming, especially the agricultural sector, during a time when cash crops became favored and inventions were being funded. However, during the 1920s, the agricultural sector of the United States was suffering. American farms had expanded enormously in order to keep up with the heavy demands of World War I. As the prices for their products increased, farmers began to borrow more money to buy more acres of land and new machinery. Expansions that brought forth development within the agricultural sector, but with a heavy price to pay, an expense that these farmers could not afford. As the war ended in Europe, farms once again kick-started producing crops, causing American farms to linger heavily in debt. Another major pivotal point of the period was the stock market crash on October 29, 1929. A significant cause of the crash was rapid growth in bank credit that led many investors to lose confidence in the market and flee. Given the name Black Tuesday, it was known as the darkest day in US history, creating a widespread panic. It was the start of what would soon become the Great Depression. The stock market had fallen 25%, $30 billion of wealth was wiped out of the stock market. By 1933, almost half of the banks, approximately 9,000 in the US, had failed, and unemployment had rose to 25%. Black Tuesday immobilized people with fear. People were afraid of losing their jobs. Businesses were afraid of expanding because nobody was buying. Only soup lines and unemployment were common. It soon developed into a physiological impact that would take its toll. The New Deal was introduced by Franklin D. Roosevelt during the Great Depression to aid America in getting back on her feet. It only lasted 3 years, from 1933 till 1936, but it made a huge difference. The New Deal helped in many ways, including creating opportunities for thousands of Americans, acknowledged the rights of workers to organize unions, and it invested in public works by building hundreds of thousands of public areas across America, such as parks, bridges, and highways. In general, the New Deal improved America as a whole and improved the life of the public. Meanwhile, in Europe, similar catastrophes were happening. Germany was forced to accept the responsibility for causing all the loss, damage, and consequences of war that was imposed on the Allies by its aggression. This was known as the War Guilt Clause, which Germany found very unfair, as they did not feel they lost the war, nor did they cause the damage. As a result, Germany under the Treaty of Versailles was expected to pay war reparations. However, a domino effect on the United Kingdom and France began after America stopped aiding Germany with the payments. Europeans were already suffering from losses and were very reliant on these payments. When Adolf Hitler joined the Nazi Party, he was set apart from the rest of the leaders due to his great public speaking skills. He was able to reach the German audience and eventually took advantage of their needs. Due to the increased support of the Nazi state, it was able to make huge investments, and by 1938, Germany's economy was booming. The Great Depression really affected the United Kingdom in many ways. There was already an economic downturn due to the First World War, and they were struggling to keep up. Their older industries, such as the textile industry, were beginning to fail. Due to the stock market crash of 1929, the value of British exports dropped by around 25%. This was due to countries reacting by taxing foreign imports to protect national produce. However, some of their newer industries were actually surviving pretty well. The pound was also losing its value as the United Kingdom was sticking to the gold standard. The gold standard is a very old idea by which the government prints money based on the amount of gold in reserve. This obviously caused many problems when the pound began to decrease in value, and people wanted their money to be worth something. People began selling the pound for gold at a remarkable rate. This was called the flight of the pound. Eventually, the government tried to solve these problems with monetary policies. One of the policies was cutting public spending and increased taxes. However, any person who has taken basic macro-level economics courses knows that this is horrible during inflation. Their policies failed, and the economy took an even bigger hit. As a result, they took the advice of British economist John Maynard Keynes and used his Keynesian monetary policies to fix the economy. The government decreased the value of the pound and stimulated the economy. John Maynard Keynes was a British economist who was also the financial representative of the United Kingdom at the Treaty of Versailles. He published a book called The Means to Prosperity. This book heavily detailed his ideas on how to solve unemployment in the United Kingdom and in the United States. The Great Depression affected France from about 1930 onwards, later a more gentle stage in other nations. However, the economic crisis did last the longest in France. In the 1920s, during the post-World War period, France and the rest of Europe suffered from large unpaid debts to the United States. Debts that accumulated during World War I due to a large number of American manufactured products being imported into Europe, with France owing approximately $4.1 billion. Eager to overcome the debt, French industries and farms kicked off once again, producing large quantities of output that would gradually lead to a prosperous economy, reducing the war loan burden it acquired. However, in 1931, the effects of the Great Depression seeped through. As a result of competition, a fall in demand of American manufactured goods crumbled the stability of American financial markets. Additionally, during the time, France had adopted a new government through the formation of the Popular Front, led by socialist leader Leen Bou Ghanem, who won the election of 1936. This was formed to confront the fascist governments in Italy and the Nazis in Germany. Despite everything that was happening in the Western world at the time, the Soviet Union did not actually go through anything similar to what the Americans or what the UK or what the French were going through. They actually experienced an economic boom. This was due to the fact that they had a communist economy. Their communist state did not allow trade with other nations, and so they did not really feel the major effects. They were mostly self-sufficient, and so they did not really have to deal with the problems of other nations slowing them down.